All right, enough making you wait. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrey, and I'm a PM of JetBrains DataSpell, which we're going to talk about today. And this is a new IDE by JetBrains made specifically for data scientists. And I'm very excited to tell you more about it and show you it in action. Before I do that, I'd like to handle housekeeping things. First of all, don't worry if any of your colleagues didn't make it to the webinar. It's been recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel. So no worries here. Even if you stop watching it at a certain point, later you'll be able to watch it in full length. Right. Finally, please do ask questions, and questions are very welcome. If you're using YouTube, just use the comments to the video and we'll get to the list. I'll try to dedicate some significant time in the end. Of course, depends on how much time we still have in the end. We start a little bit late, but we'll try to address as many questions as possible. Right. And what is the agenda today? The main topic is data science and tooling for data science. In the introductory part, we're going to talk about what data science is in a nutshell, how is it different from development, and why it matters in the context of development tools. We'll talk about Jupyter Notebooks. We'll try to see why they are so popular in the context of data science. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What is out of the scope for this webinar is reproducibility, and why, well, Jupyter Notebooks might not be the best option if you are after reproducibility. If you are interested in that, I recommend you to watch the talk by Joel. I don't like notebooks, but this is not going to be the topic for the webinar. Instead, we'll talk why we'll like notebooks, and not to mention, of course, IDs. We will mention PyCharm. We'll talk slightly about IDs and in the context of data science, how the data science tooling historically evolved in IDs, and which parts are good, which parts are not. And the central part of the webinar is, of course, JetBrains DataSpell and the gaps it is supposed to fill between data science, IDs, and Jupyter Notebooks. Good. So now that we've covered the agenda, we can jump to the introduction. And the introduction is data science. So what is the data science anyway? There might be people in joining this webinar who are pretty much in the context. They have lots of experience. Some people may just start this journey. There might be some people that heard many times what data science is, but never tried that, and that's totally fine. And why is this question important anyway? Like, what is the difference between development and data science? Well, we're going to talk about development tools, and it just happens that development tools eventually tend to be integrated into IDs. That's why it is important to think of how data science is different, because IDs were originally designed in the with the use case of development in mind in the first place. And the emergence of data science, of course, begs us to wonder where data science is different and what it may require from a modern IDE to fully support it, given that IDE now going to be used not by only developers, but also data scientists. So let's start with development. What is development in a nutshell? We write code to automate stuff. That's how we automate stuff. And most typically, development is done in teams, simply because complex programs require a lot of work, and this work is done in teams. When team works a long time on particular program, The code is being accumulated and versioned in Git, and that's how the work is done in the collaboration. So how does the typical process of development look like? Well, we write code, we run it. Sometimes we need to debug the code. We might stop the program and then repeat the process again. So pretty simple. Most of the time, we write code, run the program, and sometimes we debug it. And over time, as the code evolves, we keep it in Git to share with our colleagues, and also with the CI/CD, which we use to build and run tests and deploy the program. So how is data science is different? Probably it is important to reflect why we do data science in the first place. We do it because we want to understand data. That's basically what data science is. We try to make sense out of data. Why we do that? On one hand, we might do that to answer certain questions which we have. It could be technical questions, it could be business questions, it could be some social questions, or in other case, we might not just understand data but train a model. So a model can make sense out of data automatically. And again, in order to train a model, we first have to understand. That's why prototyping of ML models involves very often exploratory data analysis. So they come together. And how do we understand the data? We understand data by processing the data and then visualizing. The human brain is just works the way that we, given that we have some data, we cannot upload this data into the brain. Brain doesn't have this interface, and the interface the brain has is pretty simple. So it's mostly our eyes. And we need to look into the data, and we cannot look in the whole of the data. So we need to look at the slices of data. So that's why we need to filter the data. We need to aggregate the data. We need to visualize the data. So as humans, we cannot comprehend 1 MB of data or even kilobytes of data. We have to stare at very specific thing made out of the data, and that's the whole thing data science is about. And because it's understanding, because understanding is a quite individual process. So basically, we on personal level try to make sense out of data. Data science very often is done alone. So people, when they do exploratory data analysis, what they do, they probe the data with different questions, and once they have the answers to these questions, they might want to share these answers that they obtained with other people, and that's why they need to document the findings, put together all their visualizations and other things, and then to present some other people. So in a way, data science is a collaborative process in terms that the end result is always shared with other people, yet the actual process of crunching the data and visualizing the data might be done alone, unlike the development process, which is always, which is done with teams. So how does the typical data science process looks like? It always starts with querying the data. We need to either take some data that we have handy, or we need to make a query to some kind of a database, or we need to grab this data from some endpoint. We process this, and most of the time in modern world, it's done using Python libraries. Then we visualize it, which is also done with libraries, and then we repeat, as simple as it is. And in the end, we want to document it. We might want to write some explanations and then share. That's how it is. And then sometimes you want to get back to your work again and do another iteration. And even though the development and data science are super different things, they are not totally disconnected world. In fact, there are more than two roles actually that are involved in development and data science. And now with modern teams, they are different roles that are either interchanged by the same people or carried out by different people that collaborate together. It might, in a very simple example, it might start with a data scientist, a data analyst looking in certain data to get some answer to make sense of the data, to understand what we can do with that. Then we can build a model that use this data to either answer certain questions or to make certain decisions. Then we might have a data engineer who automates the processing of the data at big scale. And then finally, we might have a developer that helps automate all of this into the one program. So that's how these worlds actually meet together. Right. And that's the good place, like moment to start talking about Python and why it's such a rush, why Jupyter notebooks are so popular despite all the critics that they actually have, especially by people that automate things such as developers or data engineers, and sometimes even machine learning engineers. Jupyter notebooks get criticized because it's hard to reproduce for a reason. Still, Jupyter notebooks is something that it's really hard to imagine data science without. And so, what are the reasons? Number one is that it perfectly fits the flow of data science. So in order to understand the data, we need to turn the data into some kind of a either table data or visualization, and that's what we can do with Jupyter notebooks, where we have separate cells which are either code or markdown. So we can write code and then have inline results under the cell, and we might have different questions can come and go, and we might have different perspective on our data within one document. And just right there, we, in addition to these code cells, we can also add markdown cells where we can document our thinking process and add additional details to our notebook. And so Markdown is a big thing, and it also supports LaTeX, for example, especially when we need when we use some math, some complicated math which we need to explain in the documentation. So can you? I mean, it's incredible how all of that is available just out of the box from one tool. You have pretty much everything, and this is integrated very tightly under the umbrella of Jupyter ecosystem, which is not just one tool. In fact, it's a platform, and there are so many tools built on top of the platform. And last but not the least, everything is available via a very simple interface, right? So we've mentioned a lot of things, and all of that is pretty complicated stuff. And surprisingly, all of that is available through the very simple interface. And if you either started data science or looking into it, you might be surprised by how easy it is to start learning data science by using Jupyter notebooks. Right, so before we jump into the IDs and DataSpell, maybe briefly mention the disadvantages, the downsides. Like we've talked how Jupyter notebooks are great, so let's also mention what are their downsides, right? Certainly not going to talk about reproducibility. That's another topic, not for that webinar. Right. The first, what you realize is the coding assistance is rather limited. It's not exactly absent, but it's certainly very limited. There is a very basic code completion, but not as what you can expect in an IDE like PyCharm, right? Code formatting is not available right out of the box. There are no quick fixes, and yeah, not going to mention refactorings at all, right? Then historically, again, because Jupyter Notebooks in the originally it appears to be a separate tool which you have in your tool belt, which you use specifically for exploratory data analysis, and it was possible to invoke it from the terminal. It's not really integrated into any kind of an IDE. There is an exception. There is a Jupyter Labs, which today actually try to address the problem. Still, it's not that far in a way that we might expect, given the experience we have with modern IDs, right? For example, it's not very advanced integration with Git or like terminal, databases, Docker, SSH, and things like that. So this is what you're not going to expect to get out of the box, right? And yeah, probably finally one little thing is advanced functionality. There are many things that not included into the default, let's say, package of Jupyter Notebooks, and you have to search for extensions and you have to manually install these packages. Sometimes, I mean, it's easy, but sometimes it takes time, and this could be improved as well. Right. That is it. That was notebooks. They are great. So what about the IDEs? Right, IDs and in particular PyCharm. What do we have with our IDs, and what we can say? I mean, the easiest way would be probably to start just by saying IDs are great. IDs have so much. Pretty much most of what we've mentioned on the downside of the Jupyter Notebooks, for example, is available with IDs. Like the coding assistants, the smart editor, reading and writing code is super easy with an IDE. It's also super easy to run and debug your application. It lets you manage your environments. It helps pretty significantly with Git, for example. You can access remote hosts. You can work with databases. If your data resides in a database, in a few clicks, you can connect, query, export, and then work with this data. Continue working with data. Right. And like PyCharm offers the support for Docker, and even bindings for Vim, right? Especially if you got used to Vim bindings, this also works out of the box, and this is not something that is always is convenient with notebooks, right? And how IDEs fit data science, right? As we mentioned, IDEs were originally designed with the use case of development, and data science was a new thing in a way. And historically, when PyCharm, for example, started to provide data science features, it started with some initial support for Jupyter Notebooks. Then there was a scientific mode. It followed pretty much the blueprint of development, and instead of providing the real native experience, for example, of notebooks, it tried to mimic the behavior of Jupyter Notebooks, using some of the mechanics that IDE typically has for within the editor interface. It wasn't that interactive, and people actually complained about that quite a lot. There was the scientific mode, and some people might not realize that, but PyCharm actually has scientific mode, which lets you work with, let's say, data science projects, not only through notebooks, but also through Python scripts, right? However, you have to manually activate the scientific mode to get it. It's pretty mess, and you have to know. If you don't know, then well, you're not gonna have this feature in PyCharm. So it's just another way to say that there were quite a few difficulties in doing data science using PyCharm and IDE. And because of all that reasons, people eventually decided to use PyCharm for development and Jupyter Notebooks for data science. That's how how was the story, right? And what like this is the best point in the presentation to talk about DataSpell. So what is the DataSpell, and how does it fit the picture? Long story short, DataSpell is a new IDE which is supposed to bring data science kind of home into the IDE without any compromises on the flow or convenience, and give the users finally what they actually want, to combine these worlds in a way together, and make it possible to do data science from an IDE. So probably it's even better to show it rather than talk about it. And let me do that right away. Here we go. So this is Toolbox in case somebody uses it. If you use Toolbox, you're not gonna see JetBrains DataSpell yet there yet, simply because DataSpell is in private EP, and you have to register, and then once you've registered, you get an invitation, and that's what you are very welcome to do right now. And there is a link in the comments on YouTube where you can find slightly more details, find the Q&A, like FAQ session, and then sign up, and then get the invitation, and then try DataSpell yourself. And meanwhile, I'll launch the DataSpell on my machine, and try to guide you through how it works. Right. Let's suppose that we run DataSpell the first time, and I deliberately deleted the settings to show you how you would experience DataSpell if you run it the first time. So what do we see here? This is the welcome screen, and what we see here is it prompts us to configure the default environment. One of the things we've tried to deliberately do here is simplify the process of configuring your environment. Unlike in PyCharm, where you had to do quite a lot of things manually in order to configure your environment. Here you have everything detected automatically. So very often people use Conda in some, if they don't have specific requirements, that they might expect the default base environment just to work, and that's exactly what's gonna happen if we click launch. So it detected Conda environment, and then we just don't change anything here. We just click launch. That's what you are gonna do when you run it the first time yourself, right? And here we go. So here's the ID, and it's very similar to how PyCharm looks. In a way, we have well, it's an empty screen. We have a bunch of tool windows. One difference that you could notice is that it didn't ask us to configure a project, and that's another thing which we try to deliberately design in an attempt to make it easier to get started with an IDE, and also sometimes not to think in terms of the project, but in terms of their workspace. Let's say you have a workspace, you might want to work on different projects, and why not just work with them just from one window? Of course, unless you want to open your separate project in a separate window, right? So here we go. Here's an empty ID where you can work with pretty much any project you want, right? And another thing which you might also notice is that on the left-hand side, here's, instead of the project window, now we have workspace. And this is an interesting thing, because there are several things actually which worth attention, right? So also, like unlike in PyCharm, here we might see these two icons. One is attach directory, and the other one is add a Jupyter connection. So in a way, we try to rethink in DataSpell the concept of projects and the workspace, and on one hand, let you work with any local project easily. On the other hand, also let you configure your remote projects, right? And for example, if you might end up having several local folders, you might also open a few remote folders, and that's how you do it. So we'll start with a very simple use case, and here we go. Let me open one of the very simple projects to use for demonstration. This is the Titanic classical project. Let me just attach the folder. Here we go. We've attached the folder and it appears here. We still can click it again, this attach directory button, and attach other directories, and then we can work with them kind of in a parallel fashion, and then we can detach them. Right. What we also can do is click add the new Jupyter connection button, and then there will be a dialog, and this is something that we try to, which is still in work, but this is something that we do to help you configure your Jupyter connection. So there are several cases which might be of your interest, right? One case is you just want to start Jupyter Notebook within your local folder. Another, imagine you've started your Jupyter Notebook session outside of an IDE. You open the IDE, you want to continue working with that Jupyter notebooks, right? And finally, of course, there is a third one, which you have your Jupyter Lab or Jupyter Hub or Jupyter like simple Jupyter server running some remote instance. You can also configure that using this dialog. For now, let's get back to this local directory. And so what do we do? What do we have here, right? We have a Jupyter notebook, we have a CSV file, Python, and then, well, a few more CSV files, right? That is it. Yeah, let's just jump right in and open the notebook, and that's what we see here. It's a notebook, and you might notice that it looks actually as a notebook, not as an editor, as for example you would see in PyCharm. It consists of physical cells. It has the toolbar just like in a Jupyter notebooks, where you can control your cells, you can manipulate cells, you can create new cells, reorder cells, merge them. You can change the type of the cell. And of course, by clicking the cell, you are able to edit this, and this every cell behaves like a separate editor, except that it's a lightweight editor in a way that it still provides all the functionality which you kind of expect it to offer, like code completion, refactorings, fine usages, and all of that. And then still you can press escape like just in a regular Jupyter, and then you are in a comment mode, right? So you can easily switch between your cells with using just arrow keys, exactly like you do in Jupyter notebooks, which is a very convenient way to work with cells, right? And yeah, an interesting thing that all the shortcuts which work typically in Jupyter notebooks work here as well. And we spent some time to deliberately make the comment mode work exactly like it works in Jupyter notebooks. So the shortcuts actually are different when you are in a comment mode or you are in an editor mode. And for example, if you press D twice, then you'll delete the cell when you are in a comment mode. And if you are doing that in the editor mode, well, it will just type D twice, right? So here we go. We just ran the cell, and what we see here, we have an output, and as you see, the output is just right under the cell. And what is interesting here is also, and this is slightly different from what you have in Jupyter Notebooks, instead of this, let's say, limited number of rows, you actually have an extended version of a table with scrolling, and you can basically take a good look into the data without any additional um, um, efforts on your side, right? It appears as a table and it behaves as a table. You can export it, you can navigate, you can select things here. And what is also possible here is that you can open this data by clicking this link in a separate tab and then continue working with this data in a more convenient setting. And of course, the visualizations work exactly like in Jupyter Notebook, right? So let's run this cell, and what we see here is the Matplotlib output. This is a static one, but a very important thing which we made some significant efforts in to support this is interactive things. So, like unlike again PyCharm, historically, DataSpell provides a smooth integration with JavaScript frontend, which is a very big deal for Jupyter Notebooks because all the most advanced libraries actually are interactive and they require JavaScript. So when you work with Jupyter in DataSpell, you actually have everything that you expect in terms of the support of interactive plots like bokeh, plotly, altair, and other even Jupyter widgets. They're gonna support in DataSpell out of the box. Right. So you, other than that, it's pretty similar to Jupyter Notebooks. You can collapse things. There is a structure which now shows the headers, by default shows the headers of Markdown, and we can actually try to well, that's a code cell, right? So let's drop this cell and instead the Markdown cell instead, right? So some title, right? Or let's do it. Let's write some description here. And we invoke that, and what we see is that it gets rendered exactly like in the regular Jupyter Notebook, right? Right. So what else? What else do we have here? We didn't talk about remote notebooks, but they actually work pretty similar way, except that you have to specify the URL, and then it will prompt you to enter the security credentials, like username, token, or password. It might be different based on what kind of a security authentication you are using on your remote server, but basically going to work pretty straightforward way, and all the things which you have in Jupyter Notebooks gonna work there as well. And here you'll see all the remote files there, and you'll be able to manipulate these files just like your local folder, right? Maybe last thing which might want to mention closing the section about the notebooks is the debugger. Just like in IDE, there is a debugger built in, so you can put a breakpoint, then you can press the run cell, and then what you see here, it stops at your breakpoint, and then you see the list of variables, and for example, here's the data variable, and you can open this variable as a data frame, right, in a separate tab. This is pretty neat, right? So you can actually evaluate the state of the kernel this way as well. Again, this depends on whether you are a big fan of debugger, and this might be useful only maybe in some specific cases. And most of the time, you might just work with Jupyter Notebooks interactively without debug, right? But it's going to work the same, pretty much same way as well. Let's stop the session now, and then here we have this Jupyter tool window, and here we have the variable section, let's say. So here we see the state of the kernel, and this way we can evaluate certain expressions or just inspect certain inspections. This is possible to do even without using the debugger, right? Right. So that's all about notebooks. And we can also maybe see the platform. This is the platform feature. They work with the CSV. When we open a CSV file, even though you can look at it as a plain text file, you still can enable the, let's say, sorry, the data mode, and by default it tried to guess the format, but in case it guessed the format the wrong way, you can, for example, customize it, right? So let's say custom format, I don't know, CSV plus headers. And then first row is a header, right? So we do, well, we, all right, so that was not very straightforward. Let's do it this way, and then it will understand what we wanted, and then it will detect the headers, and we can filter the data, we can export it in different formats, we can navigate through this data. So that might be pretty neat. And sometimes instead of doing some pandas code, sometimes you might decide even that it's quicker to just to open the file and crunch it using the UI, right? Finally, it's worth to talk a bit about the scripts. So now we've opened the Titanic.py. This is a Python file, and we immediately might see slight difference with PyCharm. So when you, what you typically have in PyCharm is you have an ID, you have Python files, and you can read and like edit these files, and then you can run any of these files by creating a run configuration, right? So on the very top of PyCharm, you have run configurations, and because typically when you develop a program, you have one program, and this program evolves over time. You run this program iteratively. In data science, you might work with different arbitrary scripts where you process and visualize data, and you might want to run them separately. So in DataSpell, we by default enable the REPL mode. If you never heard, REPL is the read, evaluate, print kind of a loop where you write an expression, it evaluates this expression, you see the result, and then you repeat again. So basically this fits the data science kind of workflow. And to support this workflow, we've extended the Python editor with the toolbar, where you are able to run any part of the script right away without creating a run configuration, right? And it supports either running the entire file. If you have run separators, it will detect this and will treat them as separate cells, and you also will have this gutter icon, for example, right? So when you run any part of the Python script, it will by default run it in a REPL mode, and it will create a new session, right? So now we have this session, and we have a Python console attached to this session. So and when we run another cell, let's say, we stay in the same session, and here we actually can let's say assign some variable data tail, let's say, and we evaluate this, and we work interactively with the same session. And on the right side, we see all the variables and actually can look into the contents of these variables. And this is how we stay in the same session and keep on asking different questions about the data. And if we have any visualizations, for example, showing as a part of that script, we'll see them automatically on the right hand side with this SciView window. And if we have multiple plots as the result of the script, we'll see all of these plots here, and then we'll be able to interact with these plots as we would do as if they appeared as an output at Jupyter Notebook. So basically, it's an alternative to Jupyter Notebooks, and it is different in a way, and it has certain advantages. And in some cases, it's much more convenient probably to use Jupyter Notebooks. Sometimes when you actually run scripts, which makes sense in a variety of cases, it can be large data processing, it can be it can be pretty much anything. You might decide yourself what you feel like, what you like better, Python scripts or Jupyter Notebooks, and use actually both. Right, so that's mostly it. And having said that, I'd like to mention a few other important things. JetBrains DataSpell is under private EAP right now, and like I said earlier, there is a page on the JetBrains website where you can learn more about it. You can sign up, get invite, and then join the private EAP. We expect the EAP to go public and become generally available pretty soon, hopefully within a month or so. And since then, we're going to work towards the release, of course, which we don't really want to like promise as a fixed date, but it's pretty likely that it's going to be quite soon. So that's mostly it in regard to the presentation, and I would be very happy to look into the questions and yeah, answer as many as we can. Yep, the last important thing here, there'll be certainly a question about PyCharm, like is this going to be available in PyCharm Pro? The answer is yes. We expect the new Jupyter Notebook support to be backported into PyCharm Pro this autumn's release of PyCharm Pro. So if you use PyCharm Pro, you can expect to have these Jupyter Notebooks available in PyCharm Pro pretty soon. Right. Awesome. So now let's look into the questions we have. Let me scroll the list and then see what questions we have now. Meanwhile, if you haven't asked the question you have, feel free to post it to the list. Right. Let me see. Right. So questions. Yeah, probably always the first questions in such a presentation is there going to be a support for Julia? We can't promise any fixed let's say terms. We have Julia on our radar, and the whole point for creating a standalone data science IDE was to consider other languages beyond Python. So this is certainly possible, and just probably depends on time and also the how fast Julia evolves. But actually looking forward into it and keeping an eye on that, and would love to see it support as well. Right, let me see. Right, so there are some complaints from people that sign up for the EAP quite some long time ago, who have not received the invitation yet, and I'm sorry on behalf of the team about the situation. The general idea was to invite people as we process the feedback, and yeah, that's how that was the situation that we didn't want to invite a lot of people right away, and we decided to well, make some people wait a little bit. And now we are pretty much close to the point when we want to invite more. So please expect to get the invite like in basically weeks, in a couple of weeks, and not later. Right. There are quite a lot of comments. I'm looking for questions. Right. Repeat again. Sign up, but haven't received the invitation. A comment. Right. Some people ask if we can get invite today. So you might see the Twitter handle somewhere here, which is Andrey underscore Cheptsov. This is my Twitter username, and if you want, you can DM me there with your email, and then I'll send the invite basically today. Feel free to do that. Right. Can I save the DataSpell notebook and share it with others that use Jupyter Notebooks? Yes, that's a very good question, and this is absolutely possible. DataSpell doesn't invent its own notebook format. It relies on the Jupyter, and it actually runs Jupyter behind. That's why it works even though you run your Jupyter server outside of the IDE. So totally, you can open Jupyter notebooks, and you can save them and share back with other people that use Jupyter notebooks. That will work smoothly. Right. Right. So there's another question similar to Julia, but now about R. Will the R language gonna be supported with A, the IDE, and B, with notebooks? And the answer is yes to both. R is already supported with the IDE in general. So if well, in the settings, I mean, if you have R locally installed, it is pretty much likely that the IDE will detect R runtime on your machine, and you'll be able to create an R file and then work with it, and it will just work. Speaking of the second point, the R support with Jupyter Notebooks, it's something that's as far as if I remember correctly, in work, we actually keep in mind that notebook support should be polyglot and not be just Python, but also allow for other languages. And R is certainly one of these languages which we expect to have supported before others, right? So the answer is yes, it is going to be supported as well. Right. There are comments. There are more comments. Yeah, again, complaints that no invites. Sorry about that. Please DM me. Otherwise, you'll get an invite within 2 weeks. Right. Comments. Again, a lot of comments. There is a comment which I'm not fully sure I understand. What about the auto connect? Well, without the context, it's really hard to understand what was meant. Was it the auto connect to a Jupyter notebook? I mean, if yes, then right now you have to click the add connection button to configure your currently running directory where you currently run your Jupyter session. You have to manually confirm adding it to the IDE. So it doesn't add it automatically. However, it detects the running session when you click the add add button, right? But if I got the question wrong, please write another question in the chat. Right. So there is a comment about performance, which is a very important one. So like the user says in PyCharm, the IDE used to crash a lot and experience performance issues when opening either large notebooks or notebooks that work with large data sets. And this is one of the areas where we try to improve the IDE experience, and it, well, you have to expect that DataSpell is a lot more responsive and faster and doesn't crash as it used to crash with like as PyCharm used to crash. There's a question whether DataSpell gonna work with Jupyter Lab, and the question is, the answer is yes. It works pretty the same way with Jupyter Lab. So if you have your Jupyter Lab running outside of the IDE, it will detect it. If you click the Add Connection button, or if you connect to a remote one, it will detect that as well. There were a couple of issues in one of the earlier builds where it didn't actually detect it right, but that's like work in progress, and it, as far as I remember, it was fixed some time ago. So now it should just work. Right. So there's a question about code formatting. Can we expect that it just works within a cell? Yeah. If you by default invoke the code format action, it will apply the code formatting to your current cell by default. However, you still be able, if you press select all twice, then it will try to select all the cells. And if you have several cells selected and then you apply code formatting, it will be applied to multiple cells as well. And if you have all cells selected, then it will apply to the entire notebook. Right. Here's a question. Again, I'm trying to understand. Is there an abstract way to manage multiple data sources from within DataSpell? It's hard to comment on without understanding the context where the question comes from. As I would understand it, data sources is something within the database support, which DataSpell inherits from the platform. And in a way, you can have multiple data sources configured with DataSpell and access them through the database tool window. But if I got this wrong, let me know and I'll answer that. Right, so there is a question whether it will be possible to make a breakpoint in a Python script and then run a notebook that relies on that Python script. Will it hit the breakpoint? That's a good question, and it actually must work. Does it work now or not? That's the question I have to check. If it doesn't work for some reason, it's certainly a bug. It should support breakpoints outside of the cell that you try to debug. There is a question: is it possible to integrate with Git with DataSpell? If what is meant here is the Git support, which you know by PyCharm, yes, this is going to be available with DataSpell as well, and it's going to work pretty much similar way as you have it in PyCharm. There's going to be a Git tool window. There's going to be commit tool window. There are some plans to improve the Git support for notebooks specifically, and there are some questions how to do that properly. Because while we certainly understand how to show the D4 code cells, it's not very straightforward to understand how to show the difference when we have results as well. But that's certainly on our roadmap. There is a question about REPL M1 support. Apple M1 is supported, and when we send an invite, there is a separate link to download the distributive for Apple M1. If you face any issues there, file a bug, but it should be working as well. There is a question about Code With Me plugin. Will the screen sharing and this collaborative sessions that provided by Code With Me work in DataSpell as well? I don't see any reasons why they shouldn't work. However, it certainly will require from us to make sure that the support is smooth. So there might be some issues, and if you experience any file bug, we have not deliberately checked that, but in the end, it should work as well, because Code With Me is a platform functionality, and this would be really great to have it in DataSpell as well. Right. That is mostly it. And thank you for all the questions. They are very good questions, and there are also many comments. I'll try to look at the comments after we finish the webinar. And if you post more comments, please expect replies from me and from the team. And other than that, I want to thank you again for your time. I'm very happy to show DataSpell in action, answer your questions, and looking forward to sign-ups from you. Please sign up. Please try the DataSpell EAP, and then of course share the feedback. And we, the entire team, working hard to address the feedback and make DataSpell generally available pretty soon. That is it. Thank you, everyone, and take care.